They say the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. It's a cliché, I know, but clichés often have a nasty habit of being true. For 15 years, my life with Ethan was a supernova, a dazzling spectacle of success and partnership. We weren't just husband and wife. We were Ethan and Ava, the co-founders of Momentum Tech, a name synonymous with innovation in Seattle's fiercely competitive tech landscape. Our loft in Belltown, a sprawling space of glass and reclaimed wood with breathtaking panoramic views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains, wasn't just a home. It was a symbol, a meticulously curated stage for the perfect life we presented to the world. A life I genuinely believed was real. The shift was insidious, a subtle erosion rather than a sudden quake. Like watching a tide go out, so slowly you barely notice the waterline receding until the shore is starkly, uncomfortably bare. Ethan, always ambitious, always the driven CEO, became different. His drive, once a shared engine propelling us forward, began to feel like a solitary pursuit. The late nights at the office, which we used to navigate together fueled by lukewarm coffee and shared dreams, became his exclusive domain. Weekend emergency strategy sessions started popping up with increasing frequency. Quick trips to Portland, then San Francisco, then further afield. Cities that once held romantic memories for us became sterile backdrops for his burgeoning, separate life. His phone, an extension of his hand, as it was for most in our world, developed a new, intricate password and was now perpetually screened down on his nightstand, a silent sentinel guarding secrets I wasn't privy to. "Another big pitch, honey?" I'd ask, the question sounding increasingly hollow even to my own ears. I'd practice a casual tone, a supportive wife's cadence, but a knot of unease would tighten in my stomach. "You know how it is, Ava," he'd reply, his voice smooth, practiced, already halfway out the door, his kiss a brief, almost accidental brush against my cheek. This new AI integration for the logistics sector, it's a game changer for Momentum Tech, for us. It was always for Momentum Tech, our baby, the company we'd birthed in a cramped garage, nurturing it with ramen-fueled all-nighters and an unshakable belief in our shared vision. I was the chief innovation officer, the architect of the what-if, the dreamer who translated abstract ideas into tangible products. Ethan was the CEO, the charismatic deal-maker, the public face that charmed investors and wooed clients. We were a team, a perfect synergy. Or so the press releases, and my own heart had always claimed. The truth, I was beginning to suspect, was far more complex, far more treacherous. The first real crack in that carefully constructed facade appeared not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost mundane ping from my phone. It was a Tuesday morning, the Seattle sky a familiar canvas of soft gray. A credit card alert. A charge for $2,375.63 at Bijou Exclusives. It was a lingerie boutique downtown, one of those ridiculously opulent places with velvet ropes and champagne service, a place I'd only ever window shopped with a roll of my eyes. My heart did a strange, painful lurch, a flutter kick of disbelief, followed by a cold dread. "Our 15th anniversary is next month," a small, desperate voice whispered in my mind. Maybe it's a surprise? But Ethan hadn't been the grand romantic gesture type for years. His gifts had evolved, or devolved, into expensive but impersonal tokens. The latest gadget, a piece of designer jewelry clearly picked out by an assistant. Thoughtful, he was not. Not anymore. That evening, as we sat in our minimalist kitchen, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars beyond the vast windows, I brought it up. I tried to make it sound casual, a mere financial query. "Hey, saw a charge from Bijou on the Amex. What was that about? New client gifting strategy?" He didn't even look up from his tablet, scrolling through what I assumed were market reports. "Oh, that. Yeah, some VIP gifts for the Omnicorp team. You know how it is, keeping them sweet. Old school schmoozing still works wonders. His voice was a little too smooth, his explanation a little too quick, and my mind, suddenly sharp and forensic, cataloged the facts. Omnicorp's lead negotiator was a portly gentleman in his late 60s named Barry, whose known vices ran to vintage scotch and golf, not Parisian lace. The lie was so clumsy, so utterly transparent, it felt like a deliberate insult. The disdain in its construction was almost worse than the deception itself. Was I really supposed to be that gullible? Or did he simply not care enough anymore to craft a believable falsehood? That night, sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. I lay beside him, this man who was becoming a stranger, and the silence in the room screamed louder than any argument. Am I being paranoid? I asked myself, over and over. Am I inventing problems where none exist? But the cold knot in my stomach, the one that had been slowly tightening for months, told me otherwise. The ground beneath my perfect life wasn't just crumbling. It felt like it was actively, maliciously being excavated from beneath my feet. The not knowing became an agonizing companion. It shadowed my days, haunted my nights. It was a relentless parasite, feeding on my peace, my concentration, my very sense of self. I started observing Ethan with a new, painful clarity, like an anthropologist studying an alien species. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of an unfamiliar perfume, something floral and expensive, definitely not mine. That would sometimes cling to the lapels of his suit jackets when he returned late from client dinners. The hushed, hurried phone calls he'd take out on the balcony, his back turned to me, his voice a low murmur lost to the city sounds, but his posture tense, secretive. Once, I saw him smile during one of those calls, a soft, almost tender smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The pang of that visual was sharper than a physical blow. He became more critical of my work at Momentum Tech, too, subtly undermining my ideas in meetings, questioning my strategic decisions with a new, condescending edge. Ava, are you sure this blue sky project is the best use of resources right now? He'd say in front of the senior team, his tone implying I was being frivolous, out of touch. Coming from the man who had once championed my most outlandish ideas, it was disorienting, destabilizing. Was he trying to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my touch? Or was this part of something larger? Something more sinister? The tipping point, the moment when suspicion metastasized into a horrifying certainty, arrived on a typically dreary Seattle Saturday. Ethan was supposedly in Chicago, closing a vital deal with a new Midwest investor group. The loft felt unnaturally quiet, cavernous. I found myself drawn to his home office, a sleek, minimalist space that usually felt as off-limits as a corporate vault. His secondary laptop, the one he ostensibly used for personal projects and research, sat closed on his expansive mahogany desk. An impulse, sharp, undeniable, and terrifying, seized me. My hands, slick with a sudden nervous sweat, trembled as I lifted the brushed aluminum screen. The password prompt, a blank, impassive challenge. My mind raced. I tried our anniversary, 10/27. Invalid. His birthday. Invalid. The name of our beloved golden retriever who'd passed 2 years prior, Maximus 1. Invalid. The street name of our first tiny apartment in Fremont, Finney Ave. Invalid. Each failed attempt was a small, painful hammer blow, chipping away at the last vestiges of my denial. He had built new walls, digital and emotional, that I clearly wasn't meant to scale. Then, a flicker of a memory. Months ago, during a rare, relaxed evening, he'd been reading a battered paperback and mentioned an obscure science fiction author he'd loved in college. C.J. Cherry. It was a long shot. With a surge of adrenaline that made my vision blur, I typed it in, C.J. Cherry, followed by his old college baseball jersey number, 23. My breath caught in my throat. Access granted. The screen bloomed to life. An open portal into a world I instinctively knew I wasn't prepared for, yet couldn't resist entering. His email client was already open, minimized at the bottom of the screen. My cursor, guided by a will of its own, hovered over the icon, then clicked. And there it was, not buried deep, not hidden away. A folder, right there in the sidebar, innocuously labeled Project Nightingale. My blood ran cold. Nightingale, the bird known for its beautiful, mournful song, often associated with poets speaking of love and loss, or sometimes a song sung before death. Whose death? Whose song? My finger, an automaton, clicked. The contents weren't just a betrayal. They were a meticulously documented conspiracy. Hundreds of emails, a torrent of deceit, flowed between Ethan and Chloe Sterling, our ridiculously young, undeniably brilliant, and ruthlessly ambitious CFO. The financial prodigy Ethan had personally recruited and championed, brushing aside my initial reservations about her lack of experience for such a critical role. "She's a disruptor, Ava. Exactly what momentum tech needs," he'd said. Oh, she was a disruptor. All right. There were the sickeningly sweet pet names. My stallion, my firefly. Intimate photos from their business trips to Portland and San Francisco. Them laughing in vineyards, kissing under city lights, their bodies intertwined in hotel rooms that screamed luxury. But beneath the veneer of a sordid office affair was something far darker, far more calculated. Interspersed with the explicit declarations of love and lust were spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, and strategy documents. Meticulously crafted plans to dilute my substantial shareholdings in Momentum Tech. A series of fabricated performance issues and negative peer reviews, clearly designed to undermine my credibility as Chief Innovation Officer. Detailed strategies to orchestrate my graceful exit from the company we had built together, leaving them firmly in control, free to plunder its assets. They were systematically, clinically, plotting to dismantle my life, my career, my legacy, brick by stolen, treacherous brick. The air was sucked from my lungs. The room began to tilt, the city lights beyond the window blurring into streaks of indifferent fire. This wasn't just infidelity, a common, sordid-ethereal crime of passion. This was a coup, a premeditated, cold-blooded corporate assassination, wrapped in the guise of an affair. Project Nightingale, I whispered again, the name now tasting like poison, like ash, like the bitter dregs of a life I no longer recognized. A bird that sings its most beautiful song before it dies. My song, they had presumed. My professional death knell. The first few days after the discovery were a descent into a private hell. I moved through my life like an automaton, a ghost haunting the opulent shell of my former existence. The vibrant colors of my world, the deep blues of the Sound, the lush greens of the Pacific Northwest, even the warm glow of our artfully lit loft, had all leached into a single, oppressive monochrome of grief and disbelief. The man I had loved, my partner in every sense of the word, my best friend for nearly 2 decades, was a carefully constructed illusion. A viper I had welcomed into my bed, into my heart, into the very core of my being. How could I have been so profoundly, devastatingly blind? The self-recrimination was a relentless, merciless torment, replaying every missed sign, every dismissed doubt, every instance where my intuition had screamed a warning my heart refused to hear. But then, something fundamental shifted within me. It wasn't sudden, more like the slow geological pressure that transforms soft carbon into the hardest diamond. The crushing weight of sorrow, the suffocating blanket of despair, began to give way to a different, more potent emotion. Fury. Not a hot, volatile rage, but a cold, clear, diamond-hard anger. A focused, almost serene resolve. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my enduring trust for utter naivety. They had assumed I would crumble, that I would weep, and then quietly disappear, leaving them to pick over the bones of my life. They were about to discover just how catastrophically wrong they were. I wouldn't just fade away. I wouldn't become a tragic footnote in their sordid success story. I would fight. Not for Ethan, the man I thought he was had died on that laptop screen, but for myself, for Momentum Tech, the entity that still bore my fingerprints, my passion, for every dream they were so arrogantly attempting to steal, for the woman I had been, and for the woman I was determined to become. My first coherent thought, the first clear beacon in the fog of my pain, was a name: Olivia Chen. Liv. My Spitfire roommate from Stanford, a woman whose intellect was as razor-sharp as her wit, now one of the most sought-after and discreet private investigators in the Pacific Northwest, specializing in precisely this kind of high-stakes corporate espionage and digital forensics. If anyone could help me navigate this treacherous terrain, it was Liv. My hand was surprisingly steady as I dialed her private number. "Liv," I said, my voice low, controlled, the tremor carefully locked deep inside. "It's Ava Miller. I need your help. It's Ethan. He's not who I thought he was, and he's not alone. I think they're trying to destroy me, Liv, and everything I've ever built." There was a brief, charged silence on the other end, then Liv's calm, utterly reassuring voice cut through my turmoil. "Ava, I'm so sorry to hear this. Tell me everything, and I mean everything, from the very beginning. We'll get to the bottom of this. And then, Ava," her voice hardened almost imperceptibly, "we'll decide precisely how we're going to make them pay." Just hearing her words, that unwavering, immediate support, was like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. The oppressive fog of despair began to lift, not entirely, but enough for me to see the first glimmers of a path forward, a path paved with cold, hard justice. The weeks, then months, that followed were a masterclass in duplicity, a high-wire act performed without a net. To Ethan and Chloe, I was the oblivious wife, the slightly stressed, but still fundamentally trusting partner. I had to be. Any hint of suspicion could unravel everything. I perfected a mask of serene ignorance. I smiled at their increasingly frequent private conferences, nodding sagely at Ethan's brilliant new strategic proposals. Proposals I now recognized as insidious steps in their grand scheme to undermine my authority and siphon company assets. I even managed to compliment Chloe on a new, obscenely expensive designer handbag, the kind Momentum Tech's CFO salary couldn't possibly justify, suppressing the bile that rose in my throat as I imagined it was bought with money stolen from the company we built, from me. Every feigned smile, every polite, vacuous inquiry about their productive meetings felt like swallowing shards of glass, but I choked them down, day after agonizing day. The nights were the hardest, lying next to Ethan, the scent of his betrayal clinging to him, the silence in our bedroom, a suffocating shroud. Meanwhile, Liv was a silent, methodical hurricane, tearing through their digital lives, their financial transactions, their carefully constructed web of lies. She was a ghost in the machine, her expertise in digital forensics, unearthing a treasure trove of damning evidence. The picture that emerged was even uglier, more audacious than my initial discovery had suggested. Chloe Sterling wasn't just Ethan's ambitious, bed-hopping underling. She was a key architect of much of the financial skullduggery, her ruthless ambition, a rapacious beast that Ethan seemed all too happy to feed. They hadn't just set up one shell corporation. They had a network of them, registered in obscure offshore havens. They were systematically siphoning funds, diverting major contracts, and, most alarmingly, transferring Momentum Tech's core intellectual property, algorithms and source code I had personally developed, to these phantom entities. They weren't just planning an affair-fueled corporate takeover. They were orchestrating a grand larceny, building their own parasitic empire on the soon-to-be carcass of mine. Liv's updates would arrive in heavily encrypted files, usually in the dead of night. Financial statements showing a pattern of unexplained withdrawals, wire transfers to anonymous accounts. Details of secret meetings logged in deleted calendar entries Liv had resurrected. Scraps of recorded conversations, Chloe on the phone with an offshore banker, her voice dripping with youthful arrogance as she discussed optimal asset reallocation strategies and minimizing tax exposure. Under U.S. law, one-party consent for recording such conversations is legal in Washington state, and Liv, with her network and resources, had her ways of being that one consenting party, or finding someone who legitimately was. She was meticulous, leaving no digital stone unturned. "They're moving faster than we anticipated, Ava," Liv warned during one of our clandestine meetings, this one in a quiet, forgotten corner of the Seattle Public Library, the scent of old books and hushed scholarship, a bizarre counterpoint to our grim, whispered discussion. "They plan to make their big move at the annual shareholders meeting, less than 2 months from now. They'll present a comprehensive restructuring plan, which is essentially a thinly veiled coup. It will effectively sideline you, citing carefully fabricated evidence of your declining performance, resistance to innovation, and even erratic behavior. They've even managed to get a couple of key board members into their pocket, promised them significantly larger returns and positions in the new momentum tech." My blood ran cold. Erratic behavior? They were going to try and paint me as unstable, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it. "Then that's where we'll stop them," I said, my jaw tight, my voice a low growl. "The shareholders' meeting, the very stage Ethan planned to use for my professional execution, will become his own gallows, and Chloe's too." The plan began to form then, intricate, multi-layered, and utterly ruthless. Liv would continue to gather the irrefutable, legally admissible evidence. I would continue to play my part, the devoted, slightly clueless wife, lulling them into an even deeper false sense of security, perhaps even feeding them misinformation through carefully orchestrated leaks that Liv would help me plant. There were moments, of course, many of them, when the mask would slip, when the strain became almost unbearable. Late at night, alone in our cold, opulent loft, the silence amplifying my racing thoughts, the sheer enormity of the betrayal would wash over me anew. I'd find myself shaking uncontrollably, the carefully constructed ice around my heart momentarily thawing, allowing the raw, agonizing pain to surge through. How could he? The question echoed in the empty rooms, a mournful cry. After everything we built, everything we shared, was none of it real? But then, I'd pull up Liv's latest encrypted file on my secure laptop, stare at the cold, hard facts of their treachery, the damning emails, the illicit financial trails, the smug, self-satisfied expressions on their faces in those stolen photos, and the ice would reform in my veins, harder, colder, more resolute than before. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore, about a marriage built on lies. This was about survival. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming what was mine. Ethan and Chloe, blinded by their arrogance and their lust for power and each other, grew bolder, more careless, as the date of the shareholders' meeting loomed. They were so utterly convinced of their impending victory, so sure of my ignorance. Chloe even had the breathtaking audacity to start openly discussing potential redecorations for what was technically my expansive corner office with her sycophantic assistant, loud enough for me to accidentally overhear during a walk-by. More natural light, I think, and perhaps a softer color palette, less severe, she'd mused, with a pointed glance in my direction. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance was a constant source of fuel for my quiet, simmering rage. It only strengthened my resolve. "Are you absolutely sure you're ready for this, Ava?" Liv asked me again, her dark eyes searching mine, the night before the meeting. We were in her discreet, minimalist office in a nondescript building in Pioneer Square, the final presentation of evidence meticulously laid out on her large monitor. Every slide, every document, every audio snippet triple-checked. Once you pull this trigger, there's no walking it back. This will be explosive. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window overlooking the rain-slicked cobblestone street, a woman I barely recognized. The softness was gone from my eyes, replaced by a hardened glint, a weary wisdom. I looked older, yes, but also stronger, unbreakable. I've been living a lie for what feels like an eternity, Liv, I said softly, my voice devoid of any tremor. Tomorrow, I start living my truth. And I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. They start facing theirs. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was a sea of expectant faces. Shareholders, board members, financial analysts, tech journalists, the creme de la creme of Seattle's influential tech elite. Momentum Tech's annual shareholders meeting was always a significant event, a barometer of the industry's health. But this year, there was an extra, palpable buzz of anticipation. Rumors of a major restructuring had been strategically leaked by Ethan's camp. Ethan, ever the consummate showman, was in his element, gliding through the room, shaking hands, his voice resonant with confidence as he painted a dazzling picture of Momentum Tech's future, their future, as I now intimately understood. He spoke of bold new directions, of streamlining operations for maximum efficiency, of embracing necessary transitions for next-level growth. His buzzwords hung in the air, slick and empty. I watched him from my seat on the dais, a carefully composed mask of neutral interest firmly in place. Chloe Sterling sat a few seats down, radiating a smug self-assurance, occasionally catching Ethan's eye with a secretive, triumphant little smile. They believed they were on the cusp of their ultimate victory, the final act of their elaborate deception. They were so wrong. Finally, after an hour of self-congratulatory speeches and carefully manipulated financial projections, it was my scheduled turn. Ethan introduced me with his usual practiced warmth, his voice oozing false sincerity. And now, to share some exciting insights into our innovation pipeline and the next generation of Momentum Tech solutions, my incredible partner in business and, for 15 wonderful years, in life, Ava Miller. The polite, almost perfunctory applause felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking my skin. I rose, smoothed down the skirt of my severe but elegant charcoal gray suit, my armor for the day, and walked to the podium. My heels clicked softly, almost defiantly, on the polished stage. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands, as I adjusted the microphone, were surprisingly steady. "Thank you, Ethan," I began, my voice clear, amplified, carrying effortlessly through the vast, hushed room. Ethan speaks of bold new directions for Momentum Tech, and I couldn't agree more. It is indeed time for one. However, I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the expectant faces. Perhaps not the specific direction that he and our esteemed CFO, Ms. Sterling, had so meticulously and secretly planned. A subtle ripple of confusion, a murmur of intrigue, went through the audience. I saw Ethan's smile falter, a flicker of genuine unease, then annoyance, crossing his usually controlled features. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smugness beginning to curdle. "For 15 years," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I have poured my heart, my soul, and a significant portion of my life into building Momentum Tech from a garage startup into the industry leader it is today. I believed, perhaps naively, that we were building something founded on integrity, on shared values, on mutual trust. But it appears that some among us have a rather flexible definition of momentum, technology, and indeed, trust." I gestured to the enormous projection screen behind me, which until now had displayed the Momentum Tech logo. "If you would all direct your attention to the screen, I'd like to present some innovations of a rather different and far more disturbing kind. And then it began. The culmination of months of pain, planning, and Liv's brilliant, relentless investigation flashed across the screen in stark, undeniable detail. Bank statements from anonymous offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, under shell corporations with names like Nightingale Innovations LLC and Phoenix Capital Ventures, all demonstrably linked to Ethan and Chloe. Encrypted emails, resurrected from supposedly wiped hard drives, detailing their systematic plot to oust me, complete with fabricated performance metrics designed to paint me as incompetent. Audio snippets, crystal clear, of Chloe Sterling on a conference call with their offshore financial advisor, her voice dripping with arrogance as she discussed the best way to discreetly transfer and shield significant IP assets from Momentum Tech to Nightingale Innovations. Their passionate love affair was laid bare, too, through a few tastefully selected but undeniably intimate emails and photos. But that was almost a footnote, a sordid sideshow to the main event, their calculated criminal corporate sabotage. I narrated it all, my voice a calm, unwavering counterpoint to the explosive evidence on the screen. I was factual, precise, my tone devoid of hysteria, which only made the revelations more chilling. I detailed their systematic theft of company funds, their blatant lies to the board and shareholders, their utter contempt for the company, its employees, and the legal and ethical frameworks that govern our industry. The room was utterly, deathly silent, save for the occasional sharp intake of breath, a stifled gasp. I saw Ethan's face morph through a horrifying kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion, then dawning comprehension, then sheer, unadulterated shock, his skin taking on a pasty, sickly white hue. He looked like he'd been physically struck. Chloe, her face ashen, looked as if she was about to faint, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped, terrified animal, finding no escape, no ally. "This Project Nightingale," I stated, my voice ringing with the cold, hard conviction of undeniable truth, "wasn't an innovation. It was a meticulously planned conspiracy, a brazen plot to defraud this company, to betray the trust of every single person in this room, and to line their own pockets at your considerable expense, using the very resources you entrusted to them." I paused, deliberately, letting the full weight of my words, of their treachery, sink into the stunned silence. Then I allowed my gaze to lock onto Ethan, then shift to Chloe, pinning them both with an icy stare. "Your bold new direction," I said, my voice dropping to an almost sibilant whisper that nevertheless seemed to fill the vast ballroom. "Your grand, duplicitous plan ends today, right here, right now." Chaos erupted. Shareholders were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding explanations. Board members, their faces masks of fury and disbelief, were huddled together, some already red-faced on their phones, presumably to their own lawyers. Ethan, his composure utterly shattered, tried to speak, to stammer out a denial, a rebuttal, but his voice was a pathetic croak, drowned out by the rising tide of outrage. Chloe just sat there, frozen, silent tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, her carefully constructed world of ambition and deceit crumbling into dust around her. I watched them, these architects of my profound pain, their empire of lies imploding before their very eyes, before the eyes of the world they so desperately wanted to impress. There was no joy in that moment, no triumphant fist pump, just a grim, terrible, and deeply resonant satisfaction. The first, critical step towards a bitter, necessary justice had been taken, and I, Ava Miller, the woman they had so catastrophically underestimated, held the hammer. The aftermath was as messy, as public, and as brutal as the takedown itself. The SEC launched an immediate, sweeping investigation into Momentum Tech's finances and Ethan and Chloe's activities. Lawsuits flew like angry hornets, from shareholders, from wronged partners, from me. Ethan and Chloe became pariahs, their names and faces plastered across business journals and gossip sites, cautionary tales of hubris and greed. Their carefully curated reputations were shredded, their careers in Seattle, or anywhere reputable, effectively over. The divorce was an ugly, drawn-out battle, but a battle I was fully prepared for. I had the upper hand, armed with Liv's mountain of irrefutable proof of financial malfeasance, adultery, and conspiracy. Ethan fought, of course, with the desperation of a cornered rat, but his denials rang hollow against the weight of the evidence. Momentum Tech, my Momentum Tech, was shaken to its core, but it was not broken. I, along with the few remaining loyal and untainted board members, initiated a full forensic audit. We were forced to make painful decisions, to root out those employees who had been complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in Ethan and Chloe's scheme. It was a deeply unsettling and painstaking process, like performing open-heart surgery on the company I loved, excising the rot to save the healthy tissue. But with each corrupt element removed, with each stolen asset clawed back, Momentum Tech began to breathe again, to regain its strength, its integrity. I stepped in as interim CEO, a role I hadn't sought but couldn't refuse, and 6 months later, after a period of intense stabilization and rebuilding, the board officially appointed me CEO. There were days, many of them in those initial months, when I thought I wouldn't make it. Days when the sheer, crushing weight of my shattered marriage, the audacity and cruelty of their prolonged betrayal, threatened to pull me under. The grief was a physical presence, a cold stone in my chest. But then, I'd walk into the offices of Momentum Tech, see the faces of the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods Ethan and Chloe had so carelessly, so callously gambled with, and my resolve would harden anew. I owed it to them, and I owed it to myself, to see this through, to rebuild stronger than before. I sold the Belltown loft. Its sweeping views now felt like a constant reminder of a beautiful lie. It was tainted, haunted by too many ghosts. I bought a smaller place, a charming historic craftsman in Queen Anne, with an overgrown garden that became my sanctuary, a place where I could dig my hands into the earth and feel something real, something honest. I learned to sleep through the night again, eventually, without the aid of pills or wine. Healing, I discovered, isn't a linear progression. It's a messy spiral path, with good days and bad, steps forward, and unexpected tumbles back. There are still scars, faint silver lines on my heart, where the deepest wounds were inflicted. Trust remains a fragile thing, a delicate bird that I'm slowly, cautiously teaching to fly again. But I learned something profound, something invaluable, through that crucible of pain and betrayal. I learned about the almost limitless depths of human treachery. Yes, the darkness that can lurk behind the most charming smiles. But more importantly, I learned about the incredible, almost defiant resilience of the human spirit. My spirit. Ethan and Chloe? Their story, as far as I was concerned, ended in a sterile, impersonal courtroom. Guilty, on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. Their sentences were significant. Their nightingale innovations never sang a single note. Their names are now just whispered warnings in the ruthless corridors of the Seattle tech scene, a testament to ambition curdled into criminality. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, I stand in my new office at Momentum Tech, the CEO's office, the one I redesigned myself. It's all clean lines, warm woods, natural light flooding in, and vibrant, abstract art that speaks of energy and renewal. I look out over the ever-changing Seattle skyline, a city that once felt like the backdrop to my gilded cage, and now feels like a landscape of hard-won, limitless possibilities. I didn't just survive their storm. I learned to dance in the rain, and then I rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and finally, authentically me. What do you do when the very foundation of your life, the story you told yourself was true, is ripped out from under you? When the people you trusted most, the ones you built your world with, prove to be your greatest, most devastating enemies? Do you allow the darkness, the bitterness, to consume you, to define your future? Or do you dig deep, unearth that fierce, resilient spark, that ember of righteous fury and unyielding fight that resides within you, and fan it into a cleansing, empowering flame? It's a terrifying, disorienting place to be, standing amidst the rubble of what was. I know that landscape intimately, but it's also, strangely, paradoxically, a place of immense, untamed power. Because when you feel you have nothing left to lose, you discover you have absolutely everything to gain. Your truth, your strength, your future. Have you ever faced a betrayal that shook you to your very core, that made you question everything you thought you knew? How did you find your way back to yourself, or forward to a new self? I genuinely believe that sharing our stories, our battles, our small victories, and our hard-won wisdom can be a profound source of strength and empowerment for others walking similar paths. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your own tales of resilience in the comments below. Maybe, together, we can all learn a little more about how to turn our ashes into something new, something beautiful, something undeniably, powerfully stronger.